Good evening, you're watching London Live News at 6 with James Dickman coming up tonight. If you thought you'd seen the back of striking for at least a while after RMT's last day of industrial action on Saturday, you'd be mistaken. Criminal barristers are next in line, who walked out in the capital and across the country today, picketing over pay and conditions. Wimbledon is back and with fans for the first time since 2019, welcomed warmly by some lovely summer rain, though that hasn't dampened spirits of fans who've come far and wide for the greatest tennis tournament on earth. We'll also have an update on London's weather as well in the next 10 minutes. Also, 2 million people in the UK are suffering from long COVID, as we hear calls from a professor at King's College London that more needs to be done by employers to help those struggling at work. And music venues are also suffering from long COVID, as a Back to Live music venue prize in London is launched to tackle an 82% drop in live gigs. That's all on the way, but first, barristers walked out of courts across England and Wales in a dispute over legal aid funding today. The Criminal Bar Association said nearly 82% of its more than 2,000 members who voted in a ballot supported the action. Justice Secretary Dominic Raab said it would only delay justice for victims, while the legal aid rules set limits on fees. For 13 hours in court, a solicitor would earn around £250, an hourly rate of almost £20. But including hours of prep, they say it works out at below minimum wage. More than 1,000 cases will be impacted on each day of the strikes, the CBA said. Well, Raab urged them to agree to a 15% pay increase, though that may not take effect until next year. Well, John Sidhu, QC and chair of the Criminal Bar Association, spoke in London at the Old Bailey alongside protesters today.
We are deeply concerned about the crisis that has engulfed the criminal justice system. Today we have nearly 60,000 cases in the backlog. That's hundreds of thousands of victims, defendants and witnesses who are being kept waiting to have their day in court. Those people will be waiting for 2, 3, 4 and sometimes 5 years to get justice. We at the Criminal Bar have lost nearly a quarter of our workforce over the last 5 years. Just last year alone, we lost another 300. And you will see here outside the Old Bailey, and indeed outside other Crown Courts up and down the country, junior barristers who have made a commitment to do this job, who are saddled with huge amounts of student debt, but nonetheless feel a passion for this work and often come from very ordinary backgrounds. People like myself who went to comprehensive school. We are not people who are privileged. We are decent folk and we want to serve the public. Just to give you an idea, on average, within the first 3 years of their practice, a junior criminal barrister can expect to earn no more than £12,200 as a median income. That is below minimum wage. Many of them will be doing cases for which they'll be paid for a day's work no more than £100, and that means they're working sometimes 6, 8, 10 hours of preparation, going to court, paying for their own train fare to get there and back, and when they arrive home of an evening, they will have less money in their pocket than they had when they left.
Scenes from outside the Old Bailey today. On to a few other stories from the capital. A 29-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of 36-year-old Zara Elena, who was found with serious head injuries in Ilford in East London on Sunday. Described by police as a horrific opportunist stranger attack, Elena was walking home in the early hours and she was found with serious head injuries in Cranbrook Road in Ilford at around 2:45 a.m. on Sunday. She later died in hospital. Detectives investigating the murder of a man in Hounslow have named the deceased as 31-year-old Karimjit Singh Reel. Police were called at midnight on Saturday to reports of a seriously injured man in Staines Road in Hounslow and found him suffering from stab injuries. Well, despite the efforts of emergency services, he was pronounced dead at the scene. Detectives continue to investigate. A campaign has been launched to save 2 historic buildings from demolition in Barbican in the city. The City of London Corporation wants to demolish Bastion House and the Museum of London and replace them with a 780,000 square foot office block. Almost 90% of residents have voted for an alternative to demolition. Campaign group Barbican Quarter Action urged the CLC to reconsider the plans due to the economic and environmental problems it would create. They say the development would result in a net increase in carbon dioxide. Now to some transport stories. A big increase in the number of cyclists being killed or seriously injured on London roads has been revealed. The number of cyclist fatalities increased from 6 to 10 last year compared with the 2021 calendar year, while the number of serious injuries rose from 862 to 989, a 15% jump. However, the total number of road deaths across Greater London fell from 96 to 75, a 22% reduction and the lowest annual number on record. The reduction was largely due to the pandemic. Lockdowns resulting in fewer journeys. Now, severe disruption is expected on TfL's tram network this week due to industrial action tomorrow and Wednesday. The expected strike action is to be taken by tram drivers who are members of the ASLEF union. Buses in Croydon, Wimbledon, Beckenham and Addington will be busier than usual, and customers have been warned to allow more time to complete their journey on those days in the affected areas. The Mayor Sadiq Khan has confirmed the first steps towards powering the tube with 100% renewable source electricity as he opens London Climate Action Week. He signed the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, advocating a move away from our reliance on fossil fuels. His team say the capital's underground network is moving a step closer to being able to meet his target of the capital reaching net zero carbon by 2030. TfL is one of the largest consumers of electricity in the UK. To power the network for 12 months is the equivalent of that of keeping nearly 500,000 homes running. Now to some sports stories. Peter Cech will leave his role as technical and performance advisor at Chelsea at the end of the month. The former Blues goalkeeper took up the role in 2019, marking his return to Stamford Bridge. The 40-year-old spent 11 years as a Chelsea player, winning 13 trophies, including 4 Premier League titles and the Champions League. And Wimbledon kicked off today with full capacity crowds and the return of the queue for the first time since 2019. Spectators from around the world camped out overnight to buy on-the-door tickets to see Londoner Emma Raducanu, Andy Murray and Novak Djokovic all on centre court today. Well, first in line was Californian Brett Pham.
I want Nadal to win, but I think Djokovic is going to win. It's fun. I mean, it's very unique, so it's a fun time.
This is my second time here in Wimbledon queue. I think it's one of the best experiences in my life, because here you can feel the real taste of tennis, because here there are 1,000 people that wait for the same moment with you, and you can share your feeling, your emotion for tennis.
I think there are like 50 tents ahead of us. We're actually queuing for Tuesday. So we are queuing like Sunday and Monday and the night until Tuesday to be certain to watch Rafa. But we're here for the Wimbledon experience, but Rafa is a priority.
The jackets were my idea a few years ago, and then when we knew we were going here, my dad, he made one for every person in the family. So certainly the Canadian players, but I'm also very excited for the Brits as well, and I'd love to see Andy Murray make a great run this year. Wimbledon!
There you go, a very excited Miles family there with enough time on their hands to make those customised gilets. Now, of course, it wouldn't be summer in London or indeed the start of Wimbledon without rain getting in the way of some play today. Let's look at the weather. This evening it will be largely dry with just a few patchy cloud lingering in places. Lows overnight of around 15 degrees. Tomorrow morning we'll have a dry and fine start with plenty of sunshine. As the day progresses, patchy cloud will drift in from the west. Highs for the next few days around 20 to 21 degrees. Wednesday slightly more overcast and a chance of rain. So not a bad start all in all for play at Wimbledon the next couple of days. Now coming up in just a few short minutes. Nearly 4 million people across the UK are living with a rare disease. We'll hear from the charity, worried they're particularly being left behind as the NHS attempts to deal with mammoth backlogs.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Good evening, welcome back to London Live News. Let's just take a look at some of the main national headlines affecting Londoners. The G7 summit got underway today in the Bavarian Alps. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the group of world leaders before they issued a joint statement promising their ongoing support for Ukraine after Russia's invasion. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, compared standing up to Nazi Germany with today's ongoing conflict. NHS patients in England who have been waiting more than 2 years for surgery are being offered hospital treatment in alternative parts of the country. More than 6,000 long-term waiting list patients are being offered travel and accommodation costs to help the NHS through the backlog. It comes after the NHS released stats saying nearly 6.5 million people in England are waiting for hospital treatment, a record high. And thousands of Londoners have been making their way back from Glastonbury today as the clean-up operation at the Somerset venue got underway, as the piles of rubbish were piled high despite a strong Leave No Trace message. Well, Worthy Farm has homed more than 200,000 people the last 5 days, and some historic performances which saw rapper Kendrick Lamar close the festival last night and Paul McCartney also make headlines alongside special guest Bruce Springsteen in what was a historic 50th year anniversary of the festival. Now, back to the NHS backlog we touched on just now. Nearly 4 million people across the UK are living with a rare disease. This is according to the charity Beacon, who specialise in supporting those who are suffering. Well, they are campaigning to help people get diagnosed and treated more quickly. With millions of people waiting for common treatments, the charity are asking for those with the rarest of conditions not to be left behind. Well, Tanya has been speaking to someone from the charity and someone running a support group.
There are over 7,000 different rare diseases out there, so it's really hard for any one doctor to know even a fraction of them. When you combine that with a lack of research that's going on, there's a real knowledge gap that means it's really challenging to access a diagnosis initially, and that can lead to patients going through, multiple years of uncertainty around the diagnosis until they finally get one. And often when they do, they get handed a Google printout that says, this is your condition, go away and cope with it. There's nothing there for you. And Jess, I'm sure you've seen some really interesting and worrying studies in your condition.
One of the things that is challenging with our particular set of rare diseases that we look at, so mast cell diseases are conditions where people either make too many of the cells that react in allergic reactions, or those cells are misbehaving in ways we don't completely understand. And they're multi-system conditions. So one person might present with gastrointestinal symptoms, and another might present with anaphylaxis or a rash that a doctor might not be able to recognize. And so sometimes, they might recognize it if it presented another way, but they don't recognize it in the actual presentation of this particular patient. But also, if it's a collection of symptoms, sometimes the pattern isn't familiar, and so they don't recognize it for that reason, or they don't know who to refer to because it affects more than one system. So they might send the person to the completely wrong doctor.
Yeah, and they're all symptoms that you don't want to necessarily have to live with for particularly long. It can be frustrating if you want to get it seen and you can't, and you're sort of stuck in the system. How common are these rare diseases in London? Are many people living with them?
Yeah, absolutely. They're far more common than you'd think, essentially. So, with 7,000 different conditions, that spreads over the broad population to mean that in the UK, we're looking at maybe around 3.5–4 million people affected by these conditions. And that's a sizable chunk, but compared to some of those big healthcare challenges we hear about, around the cancers or diabetes, the challenge is that they're all broken into these little areas, and there are very few individual doctors who know about any given case. But you're absolutely right. The challenge of living with this is huge on your health, but also your mental health and well-being. Going through that period of not actually having anyone out there who can tell you what's happening to your body, what's affecting your life, can be really, really tough. And then to finally get somewhere and to be told there's no treatment, there's no hope of treatment, that can be really dispiriting to people.
Yeah, obviously the NHS has been, a hero for us over the last couple of years and have done absolutely incredible things to help us get through the pandemic. But as a result of that, the focus had to go there. And and research is showing that there is a huge backlog. Where do we sit with that? You know, what's the outlook of this being remedied anytime soon and people being able to get seen for these rare diseases?
You know, I think our patients were struggling before COVID because there are very few doctors who actually know how to treat patients. There are doctors who are willing to learn, and we love to support those doctors, but the ones who really know their stuff are few and far between. And so patients were struggling before, and now those doctors have, you know, been completely overwhelmed for years now. And were pulled away from their work during COVID to care for patients with COVID. And so, you know, the backlog is even bigger than it was, and we are seeing longer and longer waiting times to get referred, partly because they can't even get into the GP to get to have the conversation about the referral.
And, you know, as doctors and specialists, and I'm sure, you know, as part of the wider group of doctors and specialists who are sort of campaigning or raising awareness for this, what kind of, you know, action or change is it that you're looking to instill, or to what movement are you looking to start?
Oh, this is a great question. We want to see as much change as possible, much recognition of rare conditions as a real big challenge within the UK, within the world in general. You know, we would love to get to a place where rare conditions can be recognised in a similar priority as cancer. You know, cancer essentially is loads and loads of different rare diseases, but we happen to view it as one challenge. Rare disease is the opposite problem. It's loads of different things, but if we could begin to pull them together to view them as a single problem, we could really begin to make a big difference to these millions of patients who feel very isolated. So I'd love to see that moving forward. And really, I'd love to see more support for people like Jess, people who are out there setting up these patient organisations to make a difference for their communities, who are putting their free time out there to really help support and improve lives, and actually don't get much time or financial support to make that change. So, you know, if you're out there listening today, find a little patient group, a little charity that you can support alongside some of those big players, because that money will make a huge difference to people who really need the help.
Now, staying in the same ballpark, with the NHS under continuing pressure, occupational health experts have called on businesses to rethink how they tackle long COVID and mental health issues in the workplace. An ONS survey from May 2022 found that 2 million people in the UK are suffering from long COVID, with 71% reporting an adverse impact on daily functioning. Well, Professor of Defence Mental Health at King's College London, Neil Greenberg, is with me now. Neil, thank you for coming on today. Firstly, talk us through some of these stats that you've found and just shed a little bit of light on them first.
I think it's fair to say that long COVID is a big issue, you know, for the population at large, but particularly for people who are at work. Many professions obviously need to get into the workplace, you know, either physically or virtually. And if your mind's not able to easily concentrate on what you're doing, then that's a real problem. And so actually the figures that you mentioned, sort of it's between sort of probably 2 or 3 million people who are mostly of adult working age who may be affected by long COVID. And that actually represents a really large proportion of the workforce, particularly given at the moment, as we well know, that many workplaces are finding it hard to recruit people. You know, you've only got to look at the travel chaos as an example of that. And therefore, if you're thinking that, you know, something in the region of maybe sort of 5-10% of the workforce are going to be affected by long COVID, then that places a real burden upon workplaces.
Yeah, so you gave a speech the other day. What exactly were you saying that needs to be done to fight this? What kind of changes need to be made in the workplace? And as kind of a second strand to that, where are the workplaces that are struggling the most to help people with this? Is it typically sort of blue-collar industries that are struggling, or is it across the board?
Well, I think to answer your second question first, I think it's across the board, but it's particularly in industries where there's a large amount of cognitive load. And by that, I mean, people having to think in more depth, and particularly perhaps I should say in safety critical work. And healthcare, as a good example of that, is an industry that has been quite affected and has been quite vocal. Clearly, healthcare workers had a hard time during the pandemic, which is still ongoing, obviously. And also they were more at risk potentially of catching COVID because of the nature of their work. So I think it is across the board, but But the real difficulties are in people who have this sort of cognitive load, have to think in more depth about the issues. In terms of what I was speaking about and mental health and what to do about it, as with any chronic condition, I think first of all, people who are affected by it need to be validated. What is completely unhelpful is for people to hear, oh, it's all in your mind and you're making it up, and because that's just not helpful at all. For all mental health in the workplace, what we know makes a huge difference is having a supervisor, so that's your immediate line manager, who is able to speak to you about your mental health. So you feel confident to speak to them about what's going on, and also having really good peer support in the workplace and having colleagues. So there aren't any sort of silver bullets or sort of magic wand moments here. But if you have supportive colleagues and supervisors, and if people allow you to take your time to do things and look out to make sure that they don't put you in positions where you can't do the tasks, that's likely to make a huge difference to your mental health, and importantly, make a huge difference to people's ability to do their job well.
Yeah, because the figures are quite startling when it comes to the cost of mental health on businesses. Nearly £56 billion are estimated costing the UK economy in general because of work-related stress, anxiety, that sort of thing. Is there a level, do you think, in terms of playing devil's advocate and being cynical? Because we have kind of reduced the taboo around mental health. A lot of people are kind of taking advantage of taking those days off when they feel stressed, which is a great thing, some might say. But some might say, well, a lot of people are seeing it as a loophole to do less.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in any environment, you're always going to get people who play a system. That's true. But I'm pretty confident, both from my work clinically, but also from my research work, that there's a lot of people out there who have mental health difficulties. I think the thing for employers to keep in mind is most of the solutions don't involve people like me. So you don't need lots of psychiatrists and psychologists in your workplace to make them healthy. What you need to do is to treat people reasonably, be able to encourage them to speak about their mental health. And actually, if someone's got an issue, sending them home is often not the best thing to do. Or if they're at home, telling them not to work. People need to work. And if you're in a good, supportive workplace, being at work is often better for you than actually being off. And so those costs are sort of the 56 billion. And, there's other figures out there saying 100 billion, but it's all huge numbers.
Yeah.
What we need to keep thinking about is it's not about sickness absence, as in not being at work. It's about making sure that people who have mental health problems can work. And actually, if you look across the country, at any one point in time, maybe 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people have got a mental health problem anyway. So if you're starting to say that mental health is that common, we've all been affected by it in some way. So it's how do we keep going and support people rather than this kind of black and white, if you've got a problem, be off, and if you haven't got a problem, be at work. Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating and important stuff. Professor Neil Greenberg, thank you very much for talking to me today. Great. You're watching London Live News with James Dickman. A reminder of our top stories coming up after the break. Also on the way, more on the long-term effects of COVID from a business standpoint this time. We'll hear about the initiative trying to save live music venues from their continual decline.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Welcome back to London Live News. Let's just have a reminder of our main stories from today. Barristers walked out of courts across England and Wales in a dispute over legal aid funding. The Criminal Bar Association said nearly 82% of its more than 2,000 members who voted in a ballot supported Welcome back to London Live News. Let's just have a reminder of our main stories from today. Barristers walked out of courts across England and Wales in a dispute over legal aid funding. The Criminal Bar Association said nearly 82% of its more than 2,000 members who voted in a ballot supported the action. Justice Secretary Dominic Raab said it would only delay justice for victims. The legal aid rules set limits on fees. For 13 hours in court, a lawyer would earn around £250, an hourly rate of around £20. But including hours of prep, they say it works out below minimum wage. More than 1,000 cases will be impacted on each day of the strikes, the CBA said. Well, Raab urged them to agree to a 15% pay increase, though that won't take effect until next year. Now, in the wake of a triumphant Glastonbury, with live gigs having been allowed back since the lifting of restrictions a year ago as well, the live venues themselves are still in considerable financial difficulty. According to stats by the music copyright company PRS Music, the pandemic forced an 84% decline in in-person performances across the UK. Well, PRS Music has launched its Back to Live Music Venue Prize in London to help local venues come back better than ever before. Our reporter Tom has been hearing more.
So how have these sort of independent music venues been struggling? So what do you think now are the main challenges that they face?
I think the main, it's like almost every other business. It's really just struggling to keep the doors open through your cash flow. Like, how do you get people to continue to come to your venues? How do you get the financial support to continue to put on events and performances? So, like every other business that's been hit with this kind of rise in cost of living, music venues are being hit in a very similar way.
And with these sort of like struggling music venues, what impact do you think it has had on the people who work at these venues and also the people that are going to attend these events at these independent music venues as well?
It has a massive knock-on effect. I don't think we always recognise how important music and live music is, especially at a grassroots level, to the economy. So not only do you have the workers who are working in these places, in these establishments, but you also have artists that want to come and perform, and even from then there's a knock-on effect to all the people that artists employ, from your management to your agents, to your whole team. So it has a really big knock-on effect, not only financially, but then going forward a little bit, just to where's this new talent coming from? These are the places, these are the talent pools in which we find, our next Ed Sheerans and Adeles. But if we don't have that environment to nurture talent, where do we get them from?
As an artist and performer yourself, how instrumental have independent venues been to starting your career?
It's literally the most important part. I always pride myself in being a good performer and having pride in my live performance. But that would have been impossible if it wasn't for the small live events where I started that allowed us to come in when we couldn't sell more than 10 tickets, but they would allow us to come in and do our little performances and give us a space to grow as well. So the majority of my career has been spent in smaller independent venues, and that's been super instrumental to where I am today and what I've been allowed to build.
So let's move on to the competition, Back to Live Music Venue Prize. And it's the Performing Rights Society that have set this up and launched it to support live music venues around London. So could you tell me a bit about what the competition is?
Well, the competition is for live venues all around the country. It's not just London based, it's all over. A chance for independent live venues to really make their case for how the live music scene helps them do what they do, how it helps them to be effective, how it helps them to be part of the scene and grow music in general. It's an opportunity for venues to win up to £10,000 to do that. So there's you can see the criteria up on the PRS for Music website, and it's really just a really good opportunity for live venues to get some funding and get some help. That's one of the things that live venues have been struggling with. So this is a direct call to action.
Absolutely, and I think competitions like this one, that sort of send out a lifeline to these music venues. They don't come as often as they should do. And what else do you think needs to be done to sort of continue the support for small independent live music venues?
Literally just what you just said, continuous support. So that comes from the artists, that also comes from other venues. If you're running a venue and there's another local venue around you, it's kind of not seeing the other venue as competition. Try to figure out how you can help each other. Part of the problem that we're seeing is a lot of big companies buying up smaller venues. They're being taken over by bigger companies because they have bigger backing, much more funding. They can work together, and that's their strength. So as an independent venue, what we need to do, or independent venue owners need to do, is really work together, work in conjunction. And that's really what PRS is kind of really promoting.
And what do you think the future holds for independent music venues across London and even across the UK?
I feel like the pandemic has been a really big thing on many levels. And one of the things it's done is it's stopped us from going out for a long time. and seeing live music, and it's given us a real appreciation for live music and wanting to go to these events, and not just the big events where you got to watch the acts on the screen, but the events where you can get up close to the artist and see them face to face and really feel the music and really feel the vibe. A lot of it is to do with vibe. A lot of these venues, the smaller venues, they have their own personalities. There's places that you can go to, and you don't even really care who's going to be on the lineup. It's really about the venue, because you know whenever night you go, there's going to be good music. The vibe's going to be good. The feeling's going to be good. And I feel like that's what we kind of need to focus on. And if we do that, then the future's great.
Right, stay with us for our final part. The viral TikTok doctor on his new book helping people with everyday health advice. We'll hear from Dr. Emeka shortly.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Welcome back to London Live News for our final part this evening. Now, a new play is displaying perspectives from the autistic community, and it's coming to the Turbine Theatre this July. Based on real events from writer and lead JJ Green, Atypical Rainbow is both a comedic and poignant show expressing repression and the shame autistic people experience. Well, Henry has been speaking to JJ ahead of the run.
It's a beautiful piece. I'm really proud of it. It's coming along really, really well. I'm very excited about it. I know that we do obviously have a whole range of different stories, but it's quite rare to have a story about autism written by an autistic person. From that perspective, that's something that I think that the theatre industry and certainly the film industry lacks considerably. And even rarer still to have an LGBTQI take on that. So I really wanted to write it because I feel like there's representation that isn't being had, that is vital to be had, because there's a lot of people who fall into those brackets. But even if you don't fall into those brackets, it's a really interesting education, and we've created a piece that's also comical and entertaining that will hopefully provide entertainment at the same time as education to people.
So what's it like then for the community in the arts industry? You said it's very difficult. What's it like at the moment?
I think that it's getting better. I still think that there's massive systemic barriers that are in place if you have a disability within the industry. I don't think that that's going to go away anytime soon, and there are a lot of people that are putting in phenomenal work to kind of improve that. To have a commercial play on this level about disability, again, is quite rare. That's something that rarely happens. It has happened before, but it's a rarity. So it's an improving environment, because I don't think that we could have done something like this 10 years ago. But it's still not perfect, if that makes sense. I still think there's a lot of prejudice. I still think that there's a lot of the idea that why would you hire a person who has a disability if you can hire someone that doesn't, that's more cost effective and easier to deal with. And it's about access and making sure that people have those opportunities in this industry. That's kind of what I've worked towards and what I stand for.
Yeah, it's certainly very tricky at the moment. You make a good point there, but how do we go about trying to set change? Obviously, you are doing fantastic work, and doing things like this brings it to light, but it's a very tricky thing to change. How do we sort of try and go about it?
Well, I hope that every time that something like this happens, it provides evidence to the fact that it can be done. And I also think that conversations and work with organisations such as Equity, there are organisations that are working massively within access to theatre, access all areas. There are fantastic organisations that are doing it, and I think it's giving those people platform. I did a play last year at the National Theatre that was surrounding autism as well, which I think it's giving these things platform and showing people that this can work and this can be entertainment and this can be enjoyable and that theatre can be accessible to people. And like I said, we're slowly gaining that evidence, really. And I think it's going to be a slow burn, but we will get there.
For this production then, there's the slightly unusual story that you've both written, but you're also the lead in the play. What's that like for you, obviously being on both sides of it?
It's wonderful. It's really, really good. I don't think any writer ever looks at their own work and goes, this is fantastic. And if they do, that certainly isn't me. But I do believe that it's good. I've got a fantastic team around me and I've got so much faith in the production. Learning your own lines is hard because you wrote them. So inherently you want to change everything that is said. So that's a tricky thing. But it's really fun. It's really interesting. It's given me fantastic perspectives on my own writing to hear other creatives in the room and their takes on it and what they want to do with certain scenes and how they envisaged it, because a lot of it's based in fact, a lot of it's based on events that have actually happened. And it's semi-autobiographical in a way as well. And then when I hand that script over to the creatives and I see them interpret it slightly differently, that's a really interesting thing to be part of, to change the dynamic of that scene than what I envisaged it to be, but into something better, different, however you want to phrase it.
As you've said, this is obviously a very poignant show. You're very proud of it, as you mentioned earlier. What do you hope then people who come and see this production take away from it, as it is such a poignant show?
I would very much hope that people take away from it, first of all, entertainment and enjoyment. I really wanted to create a piece that wasn't just heavy, that wasn't just kind of like info dumping and educational, because I do think that to a degree going to the theatre should be entertaining, and you can discuss controversial, darker topic matter, but there's a very fine art to doing so. So I want people to be entertained. I want people to have moments that they find comical, but also learn that empathy and understand the position. It's a very first person narrative. It's very direct in what it's saying. I think that the message is super clear within it, that we need greater accessibility. We need more kindness, more empathy, more diversity in our society as a whole. But I do hope people take away entertainment and having had a good night where they can talk about parts that made them laugh, parts that made them feel sorrowful at the same time.
Atypical Rainbow at the Turbine Theatre starts on the 30th of June and it runs all the way through July to the 7th of August. Now, a new book by viral TikTok star helping people with everyday health advice is out now. London NHS doctor Dr. Emeka Okorocha decided to write "Your Health is in Your Hands" after millions of views on his educational lockdown videos or ahead of the G7 summit this week. He's also been working with the charity WaterAid, as 1 in 4 healthcare centres globally have no clean water on site, compromising hygiene and the care staff that they can provide. Well, Henry has been speaking to the doctor.
The book was based on everything I did, like from TikTok, I think. It was very educational, very informative, and very entertaining. And from that, I used that as a basis to actually write the book. When I saw how much engagement there was, I thought, hang on, there's a niche for this. And I was like, yeah, exactly. This is exactly what needs to happen right now. And then if people had this in book form so they can keep going back to it, because sometimes it's hard to go back to TikTok and reference the different video you watched and whatnot. But having a book where it's on your coffee table for you to check out, or actually what are the signs of mental health disorders, or actually how can I do smoking cessation, or what are some easy swaps I can do to make my breakfast a bit healthier. You have it right in front of you.
During the pandemic, how did it feel knowing that you were helping even more people via TikTok than you usually would be able to in your normal London NHS doctor role?
It felt great because it was different, because obviously when you're treating a patient face to face, you have that one-on-one connection with the patient. But then if you can reach hundreds and thousands of people around the world at one time and give them good advice the same way you would for one person, why not? It's a great platform to expand your reach. That means you could do more good for more people. And I didn't realize that until I actually saw the benefits and people giving me messages and thanks and DMs saying, oh, I really loved your advice and it helped me here. And now I'm out of hospital because I chose this instead of this. You're like, actually, you can make more of an impact. And that's the reason I got into medicine in the first place. So if I can make a greater impact on a greater scale, then that's great for me.
Well, you've also been working with the charity WaterAid. You spoke to a health centre in Ghana. Now, first of all, how bad is the situation surrounding clean water globally, and what did you find out from the health centre in Ghana?
It was very bad because I've known that globally we do have a bit of an issue when it comes to water, but 1 in 4 healthcare centres don't have access to clean water, and that's why I definitely wanted to team up with WaterAid, especially considering where I've come from and the country I was born in, and a number of different healthcare centres don't have access to clean water there, and you have staff having to waste resources in terms of staff and time by walking to water points up to 7 times a day. And then you have patients who are coming into labor who don't have clean hygienic water to wash themselves, having to use rags. It's hard to clean medical equipment and surgical equipment for next patients. You don't want to get yourself into contamination. And then you consider with a disease like COVID, where hand hygiene and hand washing was imperative, and we preached here in the UK, and they just weren't able to do that. And so it's obviously going to perpetuate spread of any kind of respiratory disease or any kind of virus, such as like polio, for example, which is a fecal oral virus where you need good hygiene. And so not having running water in centers like that, I find it almost impossible how they even managed to continue treating patients, to be honest. So credit to them. But yeah, it was a pretty dire situation, and I think that's why working with WaterAid to get running water in those places has had such a major impact.
So how do WaterAid go about trying to change that situation, making sure that it's in the future no longer 1 in 4 without clean water?
So what WaterAid is they've installed a system where the urgent care center has access to running water 24/7 now. So obviously that reduces the chances of respiratory infection, bacterial infection, resistance to antibiotics. It reduces the chance of repeat occurrence of disease and reoccurrence into the urgent care center, and it increases hygiene. And plus, just basic things such as dehydration for even staff workers who don't have access to drinking water for the day. It changes everything from dehydration to sanity and hygiene. So I think it's massive, and you don't realize just how important it is until you see some of these people and speak to them about their experiences. And I had an interview with Bukari from the Warkambi Urgent Care Center, and he told me just how the situation was before they had clean water for not only him and his staff, but obviously his patients. And when I heard about it, I was just like, I can't imagine an NHS that I work in without clean water in every hospital. It sounds almost comical to the point where you're thinking, how could that be true? But this is what they had to deal with day in, day out. I'm quite passionate about this, obviously, being that I come from a place where not everywhere has clean running water. I come from a place where the healthcare system is very different to what we experience here. And I just want to call on everyone to continue hand hygiene and don't take water for granted in the places that we live. We should be making sure that our hygiene is optimum, because as we've seen, not everyone has that opportunity. And then to call on, obviously, the world leaders to come forward and prioritize clean hand sanitation and water and a clean environment for everybody.
Dr. Emeka there, your health in your hands is out now. Right, one last check on the weather before we leave you. This evening will be largely dry, just a few patchy clouds lingering in places, lows of around 15 degrees. Tomorrow morning we'll have a dry and fine start with plenty of sunshine, although as the day progresses, patchy cloud will drift in from the west. Highs for the next few days around the 20 to 21 degree mark. Wednesday slightly more overcast and a chance of rain. Right, that is all we have time for this evening. Thank you for watching, and do join us again at the very same time tomorrow. But for now, good night and take care.